Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Narayanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Narayanaya. Suklambaradhanam Vitnum Sachibannam Chadubhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyaye Sarva Vignopashantaye Ananta Samsara Samudratara Naukaitabhyam Guru Bhakti Dabhyam Vairagya Samrajyada Pujanabhyam Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukabhyam Anjana Nandanam Veeram Janaki Shoganashanam Kabisamakshagantaram Vande Lanka Bhayankaram. Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Yadangri Pangeru Harenu Lagnam Nipiyaniram Vimalantarangaha Janami Tattvam Nijamatma Rupam Tam Nomi Narayana Tirthamaryam. Hare Krishna, Guruvayurappa, Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. Namaskaram. In session 24, we saw Brahma realizing the inexplicable power and maya of Purnavatara Parabrahman Sri Krishna and his effusive praise of Krishna in Tirtha's words in slokams and songs. In the current session, we are going to see a very unique Leela when Krishna teaches a quintessential lesson as to what is the real sadhana leading to Suddha Bhakti. This episode seems to have affected Tirtha so intensely that he spent several forms of poetry, Darus, Gadyams, Churnika, Slokams, and Geetams, interspersed with elaborate jatis intended for dramatization of the scene and praise by the singers. More than Vedavyasa, the originator, the re-narrator Sri Sukha becomes ecstatic in allocating a whole chapter 23 of 52 slokams to describe the incident and the last 15 slokams in the chapter for the repentant Brahmanas, namely the Dikshitas involved in the sacrifice, doing Sharanagati to Paramatman. Here is the synopsis. Tirtha follows Sukha's description of how Lord Sri Krishna, after inducing the cowherd boys to beg for food, showed mercy to the wives of some Brahmanas performing a sacrifice and made the Brahmanas themselves feel utterly remorseful. When the cowherd boys became very hungry, they asked Sri Krishna about obtaining food, and Krishna sent them to solicit some from a group of Brahmanas who were performing a sacrifice nearby. But these Brahmanas ignored the young boys, Gopalakas, even after they mentioned Sri Krishna. To them, he was just an ordinary human being, a cowherd. The boys returned disappointed, but Krishna sent them off again. But this time, advising them to approach the Brahmanas not directly, but through their wives for the food. These ladies or Yajnapatis had heard of Krishna's transcendental qualities and were all very much attracted to him, and we should say they were attached to him. Thus, as soon as they learned Krishna was nearby, they went to him in great haste, taking with them all varieties of food which were cooked and ready, kept for the sacrificial offerings. In this way, they felt and hence offered themselves to Sri Krishna, at least by taking the prasadam direct to him before those prasadam meant for offering to the various sacrificial deities could be provided to their respective husbands. Krishna told the woman that while one can develop transcendental love for him by seeing his deity form in the temple, meditating upon him and chanting his glories, one cannot achieve this result simply by being in his physical presence. He advised them that since they were Grihadharmacharinis, their specific duty in that instance was to help their husbands perform sacrifices. He therefore instructed them to return to their respective homes, even though they felt that their life was coming to a close and they should really get absorbed into Sri Krishna. Krishna persuaded them to go back. When the ladies went back home, their husbands, namely the Dikshitas, at once felt a deep sense of remorse and they lamented, Nasam dujati samskaro na nivaso guravapi. Na tapo natma mimamsa na saucham na kriya subhaha. Nasam dujati samskaro na nivaso guravapi na tapo natma mimamsa na saucham na kriya subhaha. Tatapi hyuttamaha shloke Krishne yogeshwara ishware bhaktidridanacha asmakam samskara adimatamapi. These are slokas 43 and 44 of Srimad Bhagavatam chapter 23 in the Dasamaskandam. Simplistically put, the meaning of this is, those women have never undergone the purificatory rites of the twice-born classes. They were not like the Dvijas. Nor they have lived as brahmacharis in the ashrama of a spiritual guru or master, which is very common for the Dikshitas before becoming the Dikshitas. Nor have they executed austerities in the true sense of the term. In other words, nor they have been inducted into any Diksha, speculated on the nature of the self, nor did the woman follow the formalities of cleanliness or engaged in pious rituals that are attendant on. Nevertheless, they have firm devotion for Bhagavan Krishna, whose glories are chanted by the exalted hymns of the Vedas and who is the supreme master of all masters of mystic power. The Brahmanas lamented in the words of Sukha to Parikshit. These are the words. We, on the other hand, we have no such devotion for the Lord, although we have executed all these processes. Tatapi hyuttamaha shloke Krishne yogeshwara ishware bhakti dridanacha asmakam samskara adimatamapi. We have gone through the processes of 3 different processes. But we don't seem to have even an iota of devotion that these spouses of ours had for Bhagavan. This was the regret of the Brahmanas in the words of Shuka. In other words, for anyone who has no love for Krishna, one's three births are all condemned. What are the three births? Are the three stages of a life of a Brahmana? The three births are seminal, Brahminical, and sacrificial. Seminal is everybody is born through a yoni. So that's the first birth. The second birth is Brahminical or a Dvija. When a person becomes twice born and the second time he attains Brahminhood by induction into that philosophy through rites. And there is a third birth after that. From Brahmacharya, when a person reaches Garhasthyam or Vanaprastham or going before the sannyasa, he goes through the sacrificial phase or the diksha phase. These three phases make a man's life. As per the slokas we saw, anyone who had the love for Krishna, none of this is needed. But anyone who has no love for Krishna, the fact that someone goes through the three births in one life, namely seminal, Brahminical, and sacrificial, all of them remain condemned. The Brahmanas surrender with this observation. Since Lord Krishna's every desire is completely fulfilled, his begging for food was simply an act of mercy towards us Brahmanas. All the fruits of Vedic sacrifice and indeed all things on earth are all only his opulence. Yet out of ignorance we could not appreciate this fact. Having spoken thus, all the Brahmanas offered their obeisance to Sri Krishna, as narrated by Sukha in slokas 32 to 52 of the same chapter. And this is the praise of the Dikshitas to Maha Paramatman Sri Krishna. They were doing so hoping to counteract their offense already committed. Let us now see Tirtha describing the episode and then how Narayana Bhattacharya in his Narayaniyam typically follows Sukha with a full dasakam explaining the whole phenomenon and how Tirtha and Narayana Bhattacharya are approaching it from two different angles. Aranipatra palasha kushabaram vahanto dharanitale satadannavanto yajnika ayanti pavitra panayo nityam vasulakshana vidaham savitrumandalantarattam dhyayanto yajnika ayanti aham purvamiti Yajnakushala Gagana Karma Samani Gayanto Yagnika Ayanti. In this Dasakam, in this Daru 16, the Dikshitas who regularly conduct sacrifices come almost hopping and jumping on the mud paths, careful to observe the discipline, holding the Aranipatra. Aranipatra is a piece of wood rubbed in kindling sacred fire together with Srukshruva. Srukshruva are the ladles mentioned in Vaitana Sutra. Purasa leaves, Darbha or Kusha grass. Aranipatra palasha kusha bharam vahanto. They hold all of them and they don't walk, they practically seem to be jumping and hopping. Wearing the purifying pavitra, aware of the sacrificial discipline and meditating on Parandama, shining in the Surya Mandala, these Dikshitas enter singing the Samaveda mantras as they walk in. In the next Daru, Narayana Tirtha describes how the Dikshita Patnis enter the Yagashala. Yajna Patni Vrindam Adunayati Yagashalam Anindya Karma Vidinam Vijnana Purita Shuddha Manasa Saga Vishwasa Purvaka Namra Sirasa Divya Sundaram Bhavya Gandharam Divya Sundaram Bhavya Kandaram Drita Navya Pitambaram Adbhutaharam Charu Kabari Bharabharitam Divya Chamikara Abharanagana Basitam. Now enters the beautiful crowd of Dikshita Patnis who are pure by their thoughts and actions, with sharpened intellect and humbled by their devotion and faith in spiritual observance of ritualistic practices. These ladies dazzle in yellow silk worn on, adding to their beauty. They wear the priceless pearl necklaces around their austere necks, also with their dense and beautiful flowing hair, and shining also due to the golden jewelry worn. Charu kabari bhara bharitam divya chamikara abharana gana bhasitam. Evam yajna patni sahite Evam yajna patni sahite Yajamana yajniga pravartite Yajne kriyatmake sakshat Yajnaswarupi Bhagavan Kandarpa Darpa Mahasarpa Garudayamana Divya Murti Dharo Gopa Balai Saga Divya Murti Dharo Gopa Balai Saga Chanai Sancharan Charayan Govatsan Tad Upavana Desham Ajagama Tatra Kadachite Vatsapalana Samaye Bala Uchuhu. This is Gadyam 20 of Naranatirtha. When the sacrifice commenced by the Dikshitas in the company of their Patnis was progressing, the magnificently handsome Krishna, surpassing Manmata in beauty, like the king Garuda challenging the arrogance of the snake and possessing the 6 unparalleled Kalyana Gunas, slowly herded the grazing cattle along with his associates, the Gopalas, and arrived at the location close to the Yajnashala. That was when the Gopalas said the following. And we will be now seeing slokas 85 to 90 from Naranatirtha in the opera. The very first thing is the plea from the Gopalakas to Krishna. Vayamiga vicharamohi Vayamiga vicharamohi Vayamiga vicharamohi Annamakanchamanaga Katamiga bhagavanno Balaganam Ihanam Katamiga bhagavanno Balakanam Ihanam Iti Vanabhuvi Prishto Balakaihi Balakrishnopi Avadati Gachabhuyat Annamadyantamritam Annam Atyantamritam. Vayamiga vicharamohi annam akankshamanaha katamiga bhagavanno balakanam iha annam iti vanabhuvi prushto balakaihi balakrishnopi avadadiha cha bhuyat annam atyantam rushtam. Hey Krishna, We are exhausted. And we are desirous of food, but we feel more exhausted roaming hungry all over the place for finding food. So, Bhagavane, you are the most worshipable according to what we know. Where do you think that we can ever get any food, but it must be suitable for Gopalakas like us, but that too right in the forest? Can you think of some method or place where we can go and get some food? When Krishna's friends pleaded like this to Krishna, Bhagavan says to them, we can get right in this forest the food of your liking as you just now asked for. Yajñaśālēyamasmābhihi atraivanam hi labhyate gaccha prucchet yajñaśālayam yajamānastu yajñikan yadi tena prayachanti याचस्वान्नम असक्षितः तत्पत्न्य प्रतिजानन्त्यो दास्यन्ति अन्नानि ताश्रिय. Very close to this place is the Yagashala, where you can get plenty of food to your liking. Go there and meet the head of the sacrifice and request them to provide food to you all. So said Krishna to the Gopalakas. But Krishna knew very well that the Dikshitas are not going to provide the food. So the second sloka, that is the first one which I just said, is 86th sloka. In the 87th sloka of Tirtha, Krishna says to the same Gopalakas, Yaditena prayachanti yachasvannam asakshitaha. In the unlikely event that food is denied by the Dikshitas, without fear go to the Yajñapatnis and ask them. They will rush to oblige you right away. Take my word for it. This is how Krishna really gives both options to them. Yajñikanyachamanastu pratyakyataschattaihi dvijaihi yayache yajñapatnirta krishnarte gopabalaka sagritshravanamatrena swadu annani bahunyapi adayataha param krishnam mukta sangha pradudruvu mukta sangha pradudruvu. Yajñikan yajamanastu pratyagatascha taihi dvijaihi. One Gopala went to the Dikshitas and sought food and was promptly denied of his request. Then the smart Gopalaka changed his tune and went to the Yajñapatnis and requested that they provide food to Krishna and his friends, including him. The minute the Yajñapatnis heard the name of Krishna, they prepared the most exquisite of varieties of food and rushed to Krishna, abandoning all attachment to their homes and material constraints just for the boon of seeing Krishna, the Paramatman. Tatra gadvadu gopalam gopi jana manoharam bhojayitva santuttam vihitanjalayotuvan. The Yajñapatis reached the forest where the mesmerizing Krishna in the form of a cowherd was waiting and pleaded to him to accept their food, fed him and his friends, and started praising him with great kirtanam. Sri Naratirtha captures the emotion in the Geetam 33, Bala Gopala Krishna Pahi Pahi, a famous song for over 200 years of the Sankirtana tradition. We will listen to that now. Nilamega Sharira Nityanandam Dehi Nilamega Nityanandam यज्ञपत्यस्तमीशानं लीला गोपाल विग्रह यज्ञपत्यस्तमीशानं लीला गोपाल विग्रहं प्रसादयन्ति यं वेदाः तात्पर्येणम् अनन्दिते तात्पर्येणाम् अनन्दिते This is Narana Tirtha Sloka 91. The ecstatic Dikshita Patnis, having served Krishna to their heart's content, prostrated and prayed to him before leaving that great Krishna, who by sheer Maya was standing in the mesmerizing cowherd form, while Vedas repeatedly aver that he is the one to be totally understood and merged unto for our Sahaja. In fact, this may be the suitable place where we can step back for a few minutes and enjoy how Melpattur Sri Narayana Bhattadiri, who lived between 1560 and 1646, some people believe it was 1560 to 1666, enjoyed this remarkable episode in the footsteps of Sri Shuka, who dedicated the entire chapter 23 with 52 slokams, as I had previously mentioned. As a matter of fact, Bhattadiri begins Dasakam 61 by saying, the intention of Lord Krishna was merely to bestow his grace on the Dikshita Patnis, but Krishna was eager to restore the Karmakanda traditions and practices to their original and true state, salvaging them from the state of erosion that they were subjected to over the yugas due to passage of time. Karmakanda refers to division of the Vedas that involves a performance of ceremonial acts and sacrificial rites that are directed towards material benefits or liberation. Such a definition you can easily find it both in Bhagavad Gita and Sri Brihat Bhagavatamrita about Karmakanda. It is but natural for Bhagavan to be pleased with those performing such rites in due observation. And it is desirable and necessary for the resurrection and reinstallation of Dharma, namely the virtuous conduct, that the stated rituals and ceremonies should go on without obstacles, yuga after yuga. So whenever we say just Kirtanam is sufficient, Smarana is sufficient, Mananam is sufficient, and other forms of bhakti are sufficient, it doesn't mean we are doing away with the rituals and ceremonies, because Bhagavan himself wants them to be continued in a proper order, and that too for proper benefit, not material. However, with the passage of time, there came about a certain slackness, deterioration, or basic misunderstanding in the due performance of the laid down rituals, austerities, and practices. There is no point in blaming the performers alone, since they were unable to grasp the core of the Karmakanda. As Krishna tells Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita, Evam parampara praptam emam rajarshyo viduhu sakale neha mahata yoge nashtaha parantavaha. Evam parampara praptamidam rajarshyo viduhu sakale neha mahata yoge nashtaha parantavaha. He addresses Arjuna in chapter 4 saying, Parantapa, O scorcher of foes. Yevam parampara praptamitam rajarshyoho viduhu. This yoga handed down from the teacher to disciple in succession was known to the Rajarishis, namely the royal sages or the saintly kings, who knew how to, by condition and discipline, hand them over. But owing to a long lapse of time, the content, the discipline, and the understanding were lost on this world. The principles are truths declared by Bhagavan, and the traditions handed down by the great Rajarishis like Vivaswan, Manu, Ichwaku were all lost due to the turn of the wheel of time and the dilutions. And thereby, by that time, Bhagavan himself incarnated as Purna Paramatman Sri Krishna towards the end of Dwapara Yuga. The path laid down in the Vedas is that first one should forsake coveted and prohibited things, and then observe prescribed Nitya and Naimittika acts like Sandhyavandanam, the day-to-day oblations, Shraddha, the ceremonial rites in honor of the departed Pitrus or relatives, without expectation of rewards, make offerings to Bhagavan with diligence, become pure in mind, become a jnani, a wise one, all through Bhagavan's grace, and attain emancipation through that process. This state did not obtain in the case of those doers at that time or the karmis at that time. The Lord's effort, therefore, was to reinstall the due observance of Karma Yoga with a sense of detachment, which is essential. Gateshu atoteshu abhidayate Gateshu atoteshu abhidayate abhidam Abhidayate abhidam Kumarakeshu Vodhanayachishu Prabho Shrutistirayapi Abhinimyuhu Asritim Nakinchidushuscha Mahisurottamaha Nakinchid Uchuhuja Mahisurottama. Soon those hungry and thirsty Gopabhais Gopalakas went to the sacrificial ground and begged the Brahmanas many times. This is as per Narayana Bhattadri in Narayaniyam, Dasakam 61, Sloka 3. Atoteshu abhidayate abhidam kumarakeshu gateshu o dhanayachishu prabho. They entreated the Brahmanas like this: we have come here at Krishna's bidding. Don't think we are simply coming here to beg. Krishna sent us here. We are very hungry and thirsty. Can you please give us some food? But those Brahmanas acted as though they had not heard them or anything at all went into their ears. Is it possible that they did not actually hear? Hardly. And Bhattadri is upset. Their hearing was sound. He says, Bhattadri says, Shrutistira api abhininyuhu ashrutim cha nakinchitu vuchuscha mahisurottamaha. The particular second part of the slokam has a lot of sarcasm hidden. Shrutistira has two meanings. They were well versed in Vedas is a straightforward meaning when you say Shrutistiraha. But that could also mean, interpretively, they could hear properly. In other words, they were not deaf. They had good hearing. Bhattadri feels that with their senses benumbed by continuous chanting of the Vedas, I once described, there is a term called Vedabhyasa Jadaha. They only know how to constantly be repeating scriptural works and nothing else goes into their head. These are known as Vedabhyasa Jadaha. They considered that even looking at the Gopalakas in the midst of performance of Vedic rites could constitute a sin. That's the reason why they pretended as if they are deaf and they did not even want to look at the Gopalakas. Even though the Brahmanas were well versed in Vedas, they did not seem to know or show any compassion towards those helpless boys. They did not respond with either yes or no. And that's why Narayana Bhattadri uses Nakinchit Uchuscha, but made the poor boys wait expectantly but in vain. They never even whispered a word. whether acknowledging them that they are there or not, to them Gopalakas did not exist. That's the kind of callous indifference they showed to them. Finally, Bhattadri says the qualifying word at the end of the slokam, Nakinchit Uchuscha Mahisurottamaha. Aha, Bale. Mahisurottama has been employed here disparagingly to show up the callous attitude of the Brahmanas towards his innocent, humble, simple Gopalakas. Could the compassionate Bhagavan tolerate such callous, indifferent and hard-hearted behavior? And thereby, how could Bhattadri, the greatest devotee of Krishna that he was, be not sympathetic to those Gopalakas and become angry at the Dikshitas who simply ignored them? Anadarat kinnadiyo hi balakaha. Anadarat kinnadiyo hi balakaha. Anadarat kinnadiyo hi balakaha. Samayayuhu yuktamidam hi yajvasu Chirat abhaktaga kalute mahisuraga katam hi bhakto vaitai samarpyate. Chirat abhaktaga kalute mahisuraga katam hi bhaktam vaitai samarpyate. Thus regarded, thus ignored by the Brahmanas, the hungry Gopalakas whose self-respect was hurt, distress of hunger and thirst rendering the hurt feeling lot more acute, they returned to you, Krishna, the sole refuge for all the world. Bhattadri says, is it a matter for wonder that those Brahmanas behaved in this manner? As I explained, Bhattadri was very angry. So he is asking a question. Though born again and again and again according to their past deeds, and though repeatedly observing innumerable religious rites, those unfortunate, ignorant Brahmanas did not have even the sprouting of devotion to you, Krishna. No wonder they did not want to look at the Gopalakas. If it is so, Krishna, please explain to me, how then could those undevout Brahmanas become objects of your grace? Abhaktaha kalute mahisuraha katam hi bhaktam tvaitaihi samarpyate. For those Brahmanas who were karmatas, exclusively devoted only to the performance of religious rites, merely following the rules to the letter without even a trace of compassion towards the weak and downtrodden, it was hard to dream any attainment of the fund of merits, like in the instance of Kuchela, Draupadi or Vidura, who were constantly always on the top rung of bhakti to Bhagavan. Look at the comparison. When Kuchela, Draupadi and Vidura are compared, their primary motivation was compassion. Knowledge was secondary, intellect was not even shown there. For them, compassion was the one who attracted them to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan pours compassion on them. It is to be noted that Bhattadri had employed deliberate humor here. He uses the word abhaktaha, a word having double entender, which I have talked about it number of occasions during Narayaniam Upanyasam. The first meaning being one who is not devout, because Bhattadri was always fond of using double entenders. So abhaktaha is one who is not devout. If you just split it as na bhaktaha equals abhaktaha. An interesting new meaning has been attached, namely those who have not seen cooked rice for a long time. That's another meaning. Abhaktaha meaning those who have not even seen the actual cooked rice for a long time. In Sanskrit, we can split them. Na bhaktam yesham te, na bhaktam yesham te equals abhaktaha. Also implying having given up rice food as part of the ritualistic discipline for a long time. Maybe these brahmanas who had not seen themselves any morsel of food, particularly cooked food for a very long time, were reluctant to partake with food to others, particularly when they saw so many varieties in front of them. They didn't want to share with anybody else. Maybe that may be the reason. That is how Bhattadiri derides at them. As the proverb goes, there's an old adage, could a deity who is himself on the verge of starvation offer boons in the form of food? That is the pun that Bhattadiri uses in that slokam. The boys, as advised by Krishna, then run back to the Dikshapatnis who rush to Krishna, as explained by Sukha and reiterated by Bhattadiri. Here is Sukha. In Bhagavatam he says, Chaturvidam Bahugunamannam Adaya Bhajanehi Abhishashruhu Priyam Sarvaha Samudramiva Nimagnaha. Taking along in large vessels the four kinds of food. Chaturvidam Bahugunamannam Adaya Bhajanehi. Full of fine tastes and aromas, all the ladies went forth to meet their beloved Krishna, just as river flowed towards the sea. These are the words from Sukha. Description of Sukha as he was narrating to Parikshit. What are these Chaturvidam Bahugunamannam? What are these four types of special food mentioned in our scriptures? They are Bhakshya, Bhojya, Lekhya and Choshya. The four types. Bhakshya means that which can be easily gulped, such as porridge. In Tamil we call kanji. Bhojya is that which has to be masticated before it can be followed. You got to bite and enjoy it and then before following it. That's Bhojya. Lekhya is that which can be licked like chutney, pickle and all that. And Choshya is that which is something like sucked like an orange or sugar cane or something like fruits which we hold and start really sucking them in. That is Choshya. So Bhakshya, Bhojya, Lekhya, Choshya, they make the Chaturvidam Bahugunamannam. For strength, vitality combined with sattvic nature, one does not need to resort to eating foods out of dead carcasses. And this is reiterated so many times and amplified in our scriptures and shastras. The need for strict vegetarianism and the types are explained elaborately in Rigveda Shatapatha Brahmana and amplified by Upanishad, Samhitas and Sutras, highlighting Ahara Tattva or dietetics. In fact, Hatha Yoga Pratipika combines the self-restraint and suitability of foods. Moderation in diet, known as Mitahara, is discussed in Shandilya Upanishad and of course traced back to Taittiriya Upanishad. Some time ago in one of my lectures, someone raised a question whether Pancha Bhaksha Paramannam is the same or equivalent to this Chaturvidam Bahugunamannam and how different is this from the Chaturvida food. It's very simple. The Pancha Bhaksha Paramannam has everything that Chaturvidam Bahugunamannam has prescribed, excepting that the fifth element that is added to the group is Paniyam. Because we talked about Bhakshya, Bhochya, Lekhya and Choshya. We did not talk about Paniyam, that are clear liquids such as, what do we call, rasam, buttermilk, juices, payasam, etc. They are Paniyam. So in the list of Bhakshya, Bhojya, Lekhya and Choshya which follow this Chaturvidam Bahugunam Annam, you add Paniyam, something that is liquidy, then it becomes Panchabhakshya Paramanam. But this is a colloquy and no scriptural sanction seems to correlate. So don't ask me for a quotation from scriptures and say, Mama, please forward this to me right away. Bhattadri says, O Bhagavane, you affectionately received the food articles brought by those devout women and blessed them with a compassionate heart. They, for their part, had apparently come forsaking their homes and husbands, eager for your Sharira Sambandham and instant liberation through union with you. That was why even when they set out, they did not heed the restraint and opposition of their kith and kin and came sacrificing everything, determined not to go back. But Krishna, you who had incarnated for the reinstallation of Dharma, that means virtuous conduct, did not approve of that particular method of unification. You considered that the conduct of good deeds like the performance of yajna should not face obstacles. In other words, you did not want to accept the request of Yajnapatis to really find Sahyajam at that moment itself, because the Yajnapatis would have abandoned their husbands. Their husbands were actually intent on doing their sacrifices and they were incomplete because the Yajnapatis had to go and submit the harvest along with the husbands in order that the sacrifice gets fulfilled. So Krishna was very particular that the performance of yajna that has already been started by the Dikshitas should not face obstacles. Therefore, Krishna affectionately admonished the Yajnapatis and said, no, this is not the appropriate time. You should return to your homes. First to the Yagashala, so that the yajnas could be duly completed and you help your husbands discharging their duty. And you should continue to discharge all the ordained duties of Grihadharmacharani and then only reach me. So reluctantly, these ladies listened to him and they did heed and returned to their husbands. And of course, when they met them, their spouses had no disrespect or ill feelings towards them. On the contrary, they started worshipping their respective spouses. Adaya bhojjan anugrihyata punaha tvatanga sangas prugaya ujjati griham vilokya yajnaya visarjayan imaha chakarta batrunadi tasu. In this sloka, Bhattadari, this is sloka 9 of Dashakam 61, Bhattadari makes it clear the Lord's tenet that one's own dharma, duly prescribed duties and courses of conduct, they should not be abandoned, whatever be the circumstances. Bhagavan's zealousness in protection of dharma by asking the Brahmana women to return to their husbands for the due completion of the yajnas is noteworthy in the context. Vilokya yajnaya visarjayan ima chakarta butru unupitasu agarnahan twadanga sangas pragaya ujjatir griham adaya bhujjan anugrihyata punaha. Nirupya dosham nijamangana jane Nirupya dosham nijamangana jane Vilokya bhaktim cha punarvicharibihi Prabuddha tattvaitvam abittu dodvijaihi Marutpuradisha nirundi me gata Puradesha Nirundine Gadane. This is the last slokam of Dasakam 61 from Bhattadiri. He says, Nirupya dosham nijamanganajane vilokya bhaktim cha punar vicharibihi prabuddha tattvaistvam abhishtuto dvijaihi. When their wives returned, the husbands repeatedly thought over their own folly in ignoring the Gopalakas, and thereby they ignored Bhagavani Krishna. You were easy to gain grace. Because of ignorance of Bhagavan's greatness and the true nature of karma, and the devotion of their wives who were considered to be not qualified to perform karmic religious rites. Even to the point of abandoning their spousal dharma, reminiscent of your dictum to Arjuna, Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja aham tvam sarvabhavepyo mokshayishyami ma sucha. In the 18th chapter, Krishna says to Arjuna towards the end, abandon all other paths of pursuits and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all unselful reactions, and do not despair. As a result, they become full of remorse, and with dawning awareness of the principle of the ultimate truth. So the Brahmanas praised you, the savior of the universe, in diverse ways. So the message Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Rajai is for the Brahmins who did not bother to think of Krishna, and simply routinely they were Mudaha, Vedabhyasa Mudaha. On the contrary, when Bhagavan is approached by the Yajnapatnis, he admonishes them saying, okay, no doubt you have come to me and you are completely blessed now, but it's not time for you to join me. You need to go back, help your husbands complete the yajna, sacrifice, continue your material dharma, at the end of which certainly you will reach me, you have no more births. That is the way Bhagavan distinguishes here between the deliverance to the Yajnapatnis and the deliverance to the Brahmanas who plead for his mercy. Thus Bhagavan not only granted his darshanam in person to those devout women, he also made them greatly blessed by accepting food from them, and salvation at the end of their lives perfected by devotion. As for their husbands, engaged in sacrificial rites, as long as they realized and repented their folly and regarded their wives as superior to themselves, Bhagavan had no quarrel with them. Because these Dikshitas acknowledged, accepted and revered their respective spouses without any trace of pride or arrogance, sang hymns in the praise of the Lord, and Bhagavan accepts them. The great devotee that Narayana Bhattadiri was, he showed in his work by comparing the great devotion of Brahmana women with the observance of ritualistic karma by their husbands, with reverence to the results achieved by the two paths, that the discipline of bhakti is infinitely superior to the discipline of karma. We will see more on this particular context unto the scriptures in the next week. Narayana 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 Narayana. Hare Krishna Narayana Narayana Narayana. Hare Krishna. Thiruvaiyaru.